I am not a man given to sentiment. My brother would tell you so himself, or rather, he would have before the morning of Miss Corwin's wedding, when everything about the Duke of Halvenmere quietly and irrevocably changed. I am Lord Asher Vane, second son of the late Duke, and I watched the whole of it unfold from the third row of St. Aldwyn's Cathedral on a Tuesday in early November. I have been recounting it ever since, because I was the only person in that congregation who understood what I was witnessing. Everyone else thought they were attending a wedding. I understood, from the moment my brother appeared in the last pew without invitation or announcement, that they were attending a reckoning. Let me begin at the beginning, because Emmeline Corwin deserves to have her story told from the start. She was the second daughter of a Northumberland vicar, not impoverished, but far enough below society's gilded ceiling that her presence at any London function required either a patron or a miracle. She had the former, in the form of her mother's cousin, Lady Ashwell, who brought Emmeline to London for one season with the frank assessment that the girl was plain, too quiet, and unlikely to attract any attention of consequence. Lady Ashwell was wrong on all three counts, though she would never admit it, and the error cost her nothing, because the one man who noticed Emmeline Corwin was not the sort of man Lady Ashwell had been cultivating. Emmeline was not what society called beautiful. She was not what society called anything, which was its great mistake. She had brown hair of no remarkable color, worn neatly and without ornament. She had steady gray eyes that watched a room with quiet intelligence and a mouth that pressed together slightly when she was keeping her counsel, which was most of the time. She moved through ballrooms as though she were navigating a current she had not chosen, always to one side, always observing. And she had, for reasons I have never fully unraveled, the particular quality of stillness that makes a room feel steadier simply because she is in it. My brother first saw her at the Whitmore musicale, where the two of them were seated at the back of the room because neither had wished to be conspicuous. The Duke of Halvenmere is many things, feared, precise, and possessed of a reputation for coldness that has cleared drawing rooms and halted matchmaking campaigns across 3 counties. But he has never been a man who performs attention. He either gives it entirely or he does not give it at all. On the evening of the Whitmore musicale, he gave it entirely to a vicar's daughter who was watching a soprano with the serene concentration of someone who had no idea that the most feared man in London was sitting 2 chairs to her left. He did not speak to her that evening. He watched her listen to the music, and at the interval he went to find me and said, without greeting or preamble, "Who is the woman in the gray gown near the back?" I told him. He said nothing further, which with my brother means more than a speech from anyone else. Over the following weeks of the season, he arranged, with the quiet precision that characterizes everything he does, to be in the same rooms as Miss Corwin on 6 separate occasions. He did not announce himself. He did not cross rooms to introduce himself in ways that would create scenes. He simply attended. He listened to her speak on 2 occasions when she was drawn into conversation, and on the 3rd occasion he spoke to her himself, in the corner of the Pemberton card room, about a piece of music they had both heard at the Whitmore. I was not present for that conversation, but I was told by 3 separate witnesses that the Duke of Halvenmere had stood with a vicar's daughter in a card-room corner for 35 minutes, and that both of them had appeared, extraordinarily, to be enjoying themselves. I asked him about it afterward. He told me she had opinions about counterpoint that he found sound. I understood this to be the closest he had ever come, in my hearing, to declaring himself unmanned. The difficulty was Viscount Hargreave. The Viscount was the sort of man whom society found charming precisely because he had learned to present only the surface that society wished to see. He was handsome, easy, well-connected, and had at his disposal the kind of polished warmth that costs nothing to deploy and gains everything from those who cannot see behind it. He had noticed Emmeline Corwin as well, or more precisely, he had noticed that she had attracted the Duke of Halvenmere's attention, which was currency enough for a man of Hargreave's calculations. He was swift and deliberate, where my brother was careful and reserved. Within a fortnight he had made himself indispensable to Lady Ashwell, charmed his way into Emmeline's orbit, and begun a campaign of visible attentiveness that read, to anyone watching the surface of things, as devoted courtship. He sent flowers on the correct occasions. He remembered small details, the name of her father's church, the particular shade of her preferred ribbon, and deployed them at intervals that implied close attention. He was, in the mechanics of courtship, very accomplished. That was the thing about Hargreave. He understood the performance of care down to its smallest components, and he could render it convincingly enough that it was very nearly indistinguishable from the real article. Emmeline, who had no reason to distrust a pleasant man with easy manners, and a title that put her mother's cousin into a flutter of delighted correspondence, responded with the open, cautious warmth of someone who has not yet learned to be suspicious of pleasant things. She was not naive. She had gray eyes and a watching quality that does not belong to the naive. But she had also spent a season being told she was unlikely to attract any attention of consequence, and a man who appeared to contradict that assessment with warmth and consistency is a difficult thing to distrust. My brother watched it and said nothing. I told him plainly, over brandy one evening in November, that he was making a tactical error of the first order. He looked at me across the decanter and said, "She is not a campaign to be won, Asher." "No," I said. "She is a woman being courted by a man who wants only to win, and you are allowing it to happen." He turned the glass in his hand and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "She must choose freely. I will not pursue her in a way that makes her feel positioned." I told him that was admirable and also, practically speaking, disastrous. He did not disagree with me. He also did not change course. The engagement to Viscount Hargreave was announced in October. The wedding was set for the 4th of November at St. Aldwyn's Cathedral. My brother received the card, read it, and set it on the mantel. He did not speak of it. He attended 2 functions that week, and was, by all accounts, as composed and impenetrable as ever. He declined one dinner where Hargreave would be present, and I chose to interpret that as the only concession he permitted himself. On the 3rd of November, the evening before the wedding, I was summoned to his study by a note that said only, "Come." I arrived to find him standing at the window with a glass he had not touched, looking out at a street he was not seeing. "Tell me something," he said when I came in. I sat down. "Whatever you need." "Hargreave," he said it the way men say a word they have been weighing for a long time. "The Hartfield connection, the debts there, I know there are debts. I've seen the pattern of his accounts." I was quiet for a moment. "There are debts," I said carefully, "and there is a manner of managing them that involves other people's money, which Hargreave has deployed before with some success." My brother turned from the window. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen on him since we were boys, and something had gone unjustly against someone who could not defend themselves. "Is she going to be safe?" he said. Not a question, a verdict waiting to be handed down. "I don't know," I said, because I didn't. He nodded once slowly. He picked up the untouched glass, considered it, and put it down again. "I will be at the cathedral tomorrow," he said. "As a guest. As whatever is needed." I did not sleep well that night. St. Aldwyn's Cathedral on the morning of the 4th of November was magnificent in the particular way of cold November churches, candlelight thick in the air, the smell of old stone and fresh flowers, every pew filled with the assembled weight of London's opinion. It was the kind of wedding that society attends both to celebrate and to assess, and the congregation that morning had arranged itself accordingly. The fine gowns, the careful hats, the tilted heads bent toward neighbors in whispered commentary. I arrived early. I saw my brother the moment I entered. He was in the very last pew, the pew nearest the door, farthest from the altar, tucked against the stone wall as though he had chosen the position most likely to go unnoticed. He was in black, as always. He was utterly still. He was watching the altar with the focused attention of a man who has made a decision and is waiting for the moment to enact it. I slid in beside him. "You came," I said. "I said I would." "What do you intend?" He looked at the altar for another moment. "Nothing if all goes well," he said. "And if it doesn't?" He turned and looked at me with eyes that were perfectly calm and entirely certain. "Then I will say what I have not said, because she will need to hear it." The congregation settled. The organ filled the cathedral with sound. The doors at the far end opened, and Emmeline Corwin appeared on the arm of her father. She was dressed in ivory, a gown of simple, elegant silk, with a veil that caught the candlelight as she walked. She was not the radiant bride of popular imagination. She was something quieter and more real than that. She walked with the straight-backed composure I had come to recognize as her particular courage, the composure of someone who has been told all her life to be grateful for what she receives, and who has learned to carry that instruction with dignity while feeling, somewhere behind the gray eyes, something considerably more complex. My brother did not move. He watched her walk up the aisle, and something in his face that I could not quite name, not pain exactly, not longing exactly, but the specific expression of a man who is watching something happen that he has told himself he will not interrupt, shifted by a degree I doubt anyone else would have noticed. She reached the altar. Hargreave was there, impeccable, smiling with the easy charm that had served him so well. The vicar began. The cathedral was very quiet. It was 20 minutes into the ceremony when it unraveled. I had not known what form it would take. I had suspected, given the debts and the manner of them, that Hargreave's calculation had been less about devotion and more about solvency, that Emmeline's small but solid inheritance, managed through Lady Ashwell's connections, represented the kind of quiet financial correction that a man in Hargreave's position required. I had not known how nakedly it would declare itself. A woman in the fourth row, I learned afterward she was connected to the Hartfield family, and that she had received a letter that morning, stood up and addressed the vicar in a voice that was thin but utterly clear. She said that the Viscount Hargreave was already contracted to another woman in private by a document signed some months before this engagement had been announced. She said the document existed and that she had the relevant correspondence. She said she was sorry for the interruption and that she was sorrier still for what Miss Corwin would feel upon hearing it. The cathedral did not quite erupt. It was too fine a gathering for eruption. But the quality of its silence changed entirely, from reverential to stricken, and the sound that filled it was the particular murmur of 200 people discovering that the thing they had assembled to witness was not the thing they had believed it to be. Hargreave's smile did not falter immediately. For 3 or 4 seconds he maintained it, which told you everything you needed to know about the nature of the man. Then he spoke, something dismissive, something about misunderstandings and a woman with a grievance, and the smoothness of it, the very ease with which he reached for the excuse, was worse than if he had simply gone pale and silent. Emmeline did not move for a long moment. She stood at the altar in her ivory gown, with the veil catching the candlelight, and she was absolutely still in the particular way that is not calm but the opposite of it. The stillness of a person absorbing something that has hit them at the center, and who will not, on any account, let it show before strangers. Then her head turned very slightly, and I saw the gray eyes, and I saw the moment when she understood. Not just what the woman in the fourth row had said, but what it meant. Not just that the engagement was false, but why it had been sought, what she had represented to Hargreave in his calculations, and what that meant about how thoroughly she had been mistaken. I have thought in the years since about what that moment must have cost her. Not only the public humiliation, which was considerable, but the private accounting of it. The flowers she had received and thought genuine, the remembered details she had taken as evidence of care, all of it rearranged in an instant into something colder and more deliberate. To understand in front of 200 watching people that you were valued for the wrong thing, that what you had taken for regard was a transaction, that requires a particular quality of courage to survive without breaking. Emmeline Corwin was that quality of person. She stepped back from the altar, one step very deliberate. Her father reached for her arm, she let him take it. And she turned to face the congregation, 200 people in their fine clothes, watching with an expression of such controlled and terrible dignity that the murmuring stopped. She said nothing. She did not need to. She simply stood there in the silence she had made by sheer composure and let them look, and there was something in the quality of her gaze, level, clear, asking nothing from any of them, that made the assembled weight of London's opinion feel, collectively, rather small. I have been in rooms with royalty. I have been in rooms with men who commanded armies. I have not often felt, as I did in that moment, that the most powerful person in a very large space was a vicar's daughter in an ivory gown who had decided, with no audience in mind whatsoever, simply not to be reduced. From the last pew my brother rose. He did not rise with drama. He did not make a production of it. He simply stood in the manner of a very tall man in a black coat who has been waiting for precisely this moment and has no particular interest in being theatrical about it. But he was the Duke of Halvenmere, and when the Duke of Halvenmere stands in a room, people notice, and the murmuring that had begun to rebuild itself fell away entirely. He walked up the aisle. He walked slowly, which was somehow worse for Hargreave than any speed would have been, the unhurried stride of a man who is absolutely certain of where he is going, and has no reason to hurry, because the outcome is not in question. The candles threw his shadow long across the stone floor, and the rustle of 200 people turning in their pews was the only sound in the cathedral. They always turned when my brother entered a room. He had the quality, which he had never cultivated and could not have suppressed, of making a space rearrange its attention around him simply by his presence in it. And the fact that he was walking up the aisle of a cathedral toward the altar of a wedding that had just collapsed, in the particular silence that follows a public revelation, was not lost on a single person present. He reached the altar. He stopped in front of Emmeline Corwin. She looked up at him. She had to look up. He is considerably taller than she is, with the gray eyes that were still perfectly level, and I watched something pass through them that was not quite recognition and not quite relief, but something that lived between the two, something that said, "You." He said, quietly enough that only the front several rows could hear, "I owe you an apology." Her chin lifted slightly. "You owe me nothing." "I do," he said. "I should have spoken months ago, and I did not, because I was being careful on your behalf in a manner that was not actually useful to you." A beat. "I am not naturally a man who speaks easily, Miss Corwin, but I find that I am nonetheless compelled to speak now." The cathedral was the quietest it had been all morning. He said, "I first saw you at the Whitmore Musicale. You were listening to the second movement with the sort of attention most people reserve for things they consider genuinely important, which is rarer than it ought to be, and I could not look away from you for the better part of an hour." He said it without apparent self-consciousness, as though he were reporting something factual that had been true for long enough that the admission of it no longer cost him anything. "I spoke to you in the Pemberton card room about Counterpoint, which was perhaps not the most romantic opening in recorded history, but it was honest, and you received it honestly, which is a quality I have not found often enough. I should have found a way to say, before tonight, that I was not able to forget it." Emmeline's voice, when it came, was very careful. "You said none of this." "No," he agreed. "I was protecting a choice I thought should be yours to make without my interference. I see now that I was protecting it poorly." He paused. "I am attempting at present to do better. The situation presents an opportunity, uncomfortable as its origins are." Something shifted behind her eyes. The controlled dignity was still there. It did not leave her, but something inside it moved, as though a door that had been held firmly shut had, very quietly, come unlatched. Her father beside her made a small sound. I suspect it was intended as a warning. My brother looked at him with the level, courteous attention he reserves for people he takes seriously, and said, "I mean to ask your daughter a question, sir, and I will ask it honestly, and she will answer as she chooses, and I will respect whatever she says." Her father, who was not a foolish man, looked at the Duke of Halvenmere for a long moment, and then at his daughter and said nothing further. My brother turned back to Emmeline. "I am not a comfortable man," he said. "I am aware of that. I have a reputation that is not unearned, and an estate that is large and sometimes lonely, and a habit of silence that people tend to mistake for coldness when it is more often merely waiting for the right thing to be worth saying." He looked at her steadily. "But I have wanted to speak for several months, and I find that today has removed whatever reasons I had assembled for not speaking. So." A pause. The cathedral held its breath. "Will you allow me to take you out of this cathedral, Miss Corwin, and in whatever time and manner you require, give me the chance to show you that I am better than this occasion might suggest. I make no claims beyond that. Only that I would very much like the chance." Emmeline Corwin looked at the Duke of Halvenmere for what felt, in that silence, like a very long time. She looked at him with the gray eyes that saw clearly, that had always seen clearly, and I understood that she was reading him the way she read everything, without impatience, without performance, looking for what was actually there. She said very quietly, "You said counterpoint." A small silence. And then something happened to my brother's face. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, barely perceptible, something that people who did not know him would have missed entirely and that I recognized, because I have been watching my brother's face for 34 years, as the nearest thing he has to a smile when something has genuinely surprised and pleased him. "I said counterpoint," he agreed. "In a card room," she said. "In a card room, yes." Another pause, then, "I accept," she said. "The chance you're asking for, I accept it." He offered her his arm. She took it. And they walked back down the aisle of St. Aldwyn's Cathedral together, past 200 people who had come to watch a wedding, and found themselves witnesses to something considerably more interesting. And my brother's face, turned slightly toward hers, held the expression of a man who has waited a very long time for this particular walk and intends to remember every step of it. Hargreave, I should note, stood at the altar for another moment before his charm reassembled itself into something serviceable. He said something to the congregation. I did not listen to what it was. I was watching my brother hold open the cathedral door. The months that followed were not simple, because few things worth having are. There was talk, of course. There is always talk, and Lady Ashwell had two distinct and contradictory reactions within the same week, both of which she delivered in separate letters to her acquaintances. Society had views on Emmeline Corwin, as society always has views on women who have the temerity to become interesting in ways that society did not arrange for them. My brother, to no one's surprise, was indifferent to all of it. What I observed, in the months between November and the following spring, was the specific and unhurried process by which two people who have been paying attention to each other for some time allow themselves to stop pretending they haven't been. He called on her at her father's house in the city, which Lady Ashwell had quietly arranged for her to remain at through the winter. He brought, on his second visit, a piece of sheet music that he thought she might not know, and which she had in fact already played, and they had the sort of argument about whether the third movement worked structurally that lasted the better part of an hour and left both of them, I was told, considerably more cheerful than they'd arrived. He took her on a gray February afternoon to hear a quartet perform a program she had mentioned in passing at their first meeting. She had not remembered mentioning it. He had not forgotten that she had. That particular gap between what a person reveals without intention and what another person chooses to retain is, I have come to believe, one of the truest measures of how much someone matters to you. Hargreave had remembered the shade of her ribbon. My brother had remembered what she cared about. It is not a subtle distinction. She came to dinner at Halvenmere House in March. I was there because my brother had asked me, I think, though he would not say so because he wanted a witness and because he trusts me and because he was more nervous than he would have acknowledged to any other living soul. Emmeline Corwin arrived in a dark green gown, which was not remarkable, and sat at the dinner table with the quiet self-possession she always carried, and by the third course was engaged in a debate with my brother about the management of the Halvenmere tenancies that left him with the particular expression I had learned to recognize as the one he wears when he is very pleased and does not want to show it. She saw it, I watched her see it, the flicker of something warm behind the gray eyes, recognizing that expression for what it was. And she said nothing about it, which was, I think, what he would have liked best. He proposed on a Tuesday in April, in the library at Halvenmere House, with no ceremony and no audience except the fire and, I suspect, the quiet of a room that had been waiting a long time for that particular conversation. She told me about it afterward, because she had become, by some process I find difficult to explain, the person who tells me things, perhaps because I was there at the beginning in the last pew, and she understood that I had always been on her side of this. She said he had told her that he had been wrong to wait, and that he understood if she needed more time, and that he was asking now because he could no longer think of a single good reason not to. She said she had told him that she needed no more time, that she had made her determination in November when he walked up the aisle of the cathedral, and that he ought to know that she found his management of the Halvenmere Mill accounts flawed in 3 specific areas that she would be pleased to address. She said he had laughed, actually laughed in the library for the first time in what she suspected was a very long time. She said the sound of it was one of the best things she had heard, and that she intended to keep on finding reasons for it. There is a version of this story that society prefers, and in that version the events of November are the center of it, the jilting, the revelation, the Duke who stood up from the last pew and walked up the aisle and made everything right again. That version has certain satisfactions, and I do not deny them. But it is not the version I was present for. The version I was present for is longer and quieter, and its center is not the cathedral at all. Its center is a library in April, and a Tuesday in February when a man remembered what a woman had mentioned once in passing, and a card room in September where 2 people argued about counterpoint for 35 minutes and discovered that the world was suddenly slightly more interesting than it had been before they sat down. The cathedral was where my brother finally stopped waiting, but the story began long before that, in smaller rooms and smaller moments, in the specific accumulation of attention that is the only honest thing love has ever been made of. They were married in June, quietly, in a small ceremony that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the one in November. Her father performed the blessing. I stood as witness. There were perhaps 30 people in attendance, all of whom had been chosen rather than assembled, and the chapel, small, stone, sunlit through old windows, was warmer than St. Aldwyn's had ever been in November. When the vicar pronounced them, my brother turned and looked at her with the same eyes he had looked at her with in November, steady, certain, finally permitted to be what they were. And the thing that moved through his face was not triumph, not relief, but something quieter and more durable than both. I have known my brother for all of his 34 years. I have watched him conduct himself through rooms and situations that would have undone lesser men. I have seen him be precise and cold and correct, and I have seen him be wrong in the specific way of people who mistake control for protection. I have not, until Emmeline, seen him be simply present, entirely and without reserve present, in a way that asked nothing of the world except to allow it. She gave him that. She gave it to him by being, consistently and without performance, exactly who she was, by watching him with those clear gray eyes that saw past the reputation and the silence to the man underneath, and by refusing, with the same quiet composure she had brought to the cathedral on the worst morning of her life, to be anything other than honest. He did not deserve to find her by any accounting of what he had earned. None of us deserve the things that change us. But I was there in the last pew, and I watched him stand and walk up the aisle, and I have been glad of it every day since. She is the Duchess of Halvenmere now. She has rearranged 3 of the estate's mill accounts, which were indeed flawed in the ways she had indicated, and the Halvenmere tenancies have not been so well managed in my memory. She reads Counterpoint in the evenings and argues about it with her husband across the fire, and my brother has, in the intervening months, developed an expression I have no name for, something between recognition and relief, and the specific peace of a man who has found the only room he ever truly wanted to be in. He told me once that he had sat in the last pew of St. Aldwyn's not knowing what he would do, only that he would do whatever was needed. That he had told himself on the way there that if all went well he would do nothing, he would let it go and make his peace with it. I asked him whether he had believed himself. He considered this for a moment. No, he said, not particularly. I said that I had thought as much. He looked at me with the mild expression he reserves for moments when he considers me to have been right about something he does not wish to fully concede. Then, she said yes to the chance before she said yes to the proposal. I find that I am still grateful for it in that order. The card-room argument about Counterpoint, I said. It was a very sound argument, he said. I agreed that it was, and left it at that, because some things, even after everything, belong only to 2 people in a library or a card-room corner, or the quiet last pew of a cathedral where one man finally stood up.